To start recording.
Okay, we're on.
We're on air?
Yep.
No picture.
Oh, what's going on, which is great. There we go.
Okay, welcome everyone to this ordinary meeting of the Noosa Council. I call the meeting to order and we begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're gathered on, the Gubbi or Kabi people, paying our respect to their elders past, present and emerging. We have two apologies tonight. Both Councillor Jackson and Councillor Jurizovic are apologies. Councillors, please note that Brett de Chastel is away at a conference at the moment and Deb Ietzi has drawn the short straw to be acting CEO this evening. So we begin with confirmation of minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 17th of October. Can I have a mover? Move Councillor Glasgow, seconded Councillor Pardon. Put the motion, all those in favour, thank you, that's carried. And now the minutes of the special meeting from the 28th of October. Moved Councillor Stockwell, seconded Councillor Wilkie. I'll put the motion, all those in favour, thank you, that's carried. Unusually we have a Mayoral minute tonight, so I'm going to move my Mayoral minute. It's in the agenda, so people will have seen the Mayoral minute that relates to the trial public consultation for the 2021 budget. The information's largely contained in the report with the Mayoral minute. This is just to note that I made a personal commitment in my budget speech when we adopted the budget that we would be engaging in public consultation for the 2021 budget. And I've designed this process with consultation with the staff. It has been run through the leadership team meeting and I now offer it to my fellow councillors for their consideration. Thank you. Anyone got any questions or wish to speak to this?
I'll speak to it.
Yeah, sure, Councillor Park.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, I think in the light of the Belcara legislation and Belcara Stage 2 that the government's working on, I think ultimately the government will expect most councils across the state to take some sort of position like this with regards to openness and transparency of the budget process. I remember years ago in the old council, we set up a budget sort of reference group, community group. It was brought in here. We had a facilitator. And if the CEO was here, Brett de Chastel, he was part of that because he was head of our finance back then. But and it was mainly to do with the ratings. How did we get those different categories of rating, etc. So there was a group, so we did attempt to educate the people, I guess, back then. And Councillor Wilkie may remember that as well. I'm not sure whether he was elected at that time or not. But this goes way further. This is a step way further. And if we look at bottom of page 5, where it talks about at the beginning with a community facilitator, not only are we looking at they talk about budget overview, benchmarking against other councils, corporate plan priorities, financial sustainability, policy overview, service level catalogue, 10-year capital works program, relevant current budget related council policies. This goes far more and far in depth with regards to information for the people than we've done in the past. And I think it's a good thing. I understand in Victoria for 5 years or so, and Kim Rawlings might be abreast of that they actually put out a draft budget, send it out to the community for comment for about 3 weeks, and then take in the various comments, consultations that people send in. So Victoria's been doing similar things with regards to openness, transparency, and an opportunity for the public to have a say for a long time. So I think it's about time Queensland got on the front foot with this. I had a bit of a smile to myself when they talk about open, transparent budgets, and I refer to the state government. It'd be interesting if we'll have people sitting here while we discuss budget and why we might put a levy up or why we might have an increase. I'd love to watch the state in the back rooms doing the same thing. It'd be very, very interesting. But certainly I support the Mayor's endeavour here and Council's endeavour. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else wish to speak to this? Councillor Stockwell?
Yeah, I'd like to speak. I think, as we all know, budget meetings generally are a real hoot, and it would be a shame to keep it all to ourselves. But seriously, there will be people in the community who find this, and in stakeholder groups that are intimately interested. And I recall in the time that Councillor Pardon was talking about that I was a member of the Noosa Residents and Ratepayers, and we had one of the executive members there was a great data cruncher, and she actually got the whole rate database and ran the scenarios at home, and to try and come up with the solutions that met the interests of the ratepayers from their perspective. So there is precedent in terms of giving information out and getting back the priorities of the community, and I think that is going to be at the heart of it, is that facilitated and deliberative process where we can have a better understanding of what the community preferences may be after they receive the same sort of information that we do. And I've had experience with this before. When I was just a mere council officer early in my career, the CEO introduced a new levy, and I said, well, why don't we ask the voters, the electorate, what to do? And so we sent out the question, we're going to charge you extra $10, how would you like it spent? And we had a whole host of things they could spend it on. And for the next 3 years, I spent it exactly along the lines of those priorities, and the community was never worried about that introduction of that levy because they could see their priorities being met and that they had set it. And I think that's where we'll get to with this budget, that it'll be a much more open process where the community can understand where the priorities for investment are. So well done, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkie?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I commend you for this initiative. As has been mentioned, local government's under the greatest amount of scrutiny in terms of governance and transparency and accountability, perhaps for decades. And we've already introduced, Noosa Council already has a good reputation for transparency and good governance, and we've introduced a few practices recently as a result of Belcara and recommendations of the Belcara report. This is another suggestion, and we're getting the Mayor's idea here is very proactive, and it's consistent with the principles of open local government, such as Noosa Council, in that it will give the residents and ratepayers the same information that councillors have access to at the same time, as we do every meeting round, when all these reports for the Planning and Environment Committee portfolio, the Services and Organisation Committee reports are made available to the public at the same time as they're made available to the councillors. They can consider items of interest to them, attend the public meetings over a 2-week period, and I'm sure also that this process will enable the residents and ratepayers interested enough to attend and participate on behalf of their community organisations, that they will be a lot more informed about the complexities and the difficulties in reaching decisions in the best interest of the community, and also working within a constrained budget of a small council, a council that punches well above its weight in terms of its size, but also because of its financially responsible practices is able to deliver over and above what's delivered normally by a council of its size. So I commend you for this initiative.
Thank you.
That's all been said.
Okay. I have no need to close, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. We now move on to the recommendations of the Audit and Risk Committee.
Petitions.
Oh, petitions. Yes, do we have any petitions? Beg your pardon? No petitions this evening. So we do move on to the Audit and Risk Committee recommendations. Number 1 is the Queensland Audit Office briefing note. Number 2 is the 2018-19 annual financial statements. Number 3 is the governance update. Number 4 is the risk management and fraud and corruption update. Number 5 is the internal audit. And number 6 is Noosa Council's annual report 2018-19. The recommendation is that they be adopted.
I move it, Mr.
Moved Councillor Wilkie, seconded Councillor Glasgow. Anyone wish to speak to this? Put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you, that's carried. We now go on to the Planning and Environment Committee recommendations. Item number 1, is the first of the grants, which is the Community and Environment Grants Program Funding Environment Project Grants Round 2. Councillor Stockwell.
I would like to declare a perceived conflict in this matter in relation to the grant application by the Mayor River Catchment Coordination. So, yeah, that one. I advise I advise that as a sole trader in my business Watershed Australia, I have both been contracted by and have some subcontracted officer of MRCCC during this term of council. In addition, I am the council nominated representative for the MRCCC by council. However, I do believe, as I have a perceived conflict, that I will leave the room and not participate in debate or decision on this matter.
Thank you, Councillor.
So this is a very important part of the CEO's role.
Opening and closing doors, very important business.
I might come and get you.
Councillor Wilkie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, I'd like to declare a perceived conflict of interest in this matter in relation to the grant application by Ecosystem Management Biosecurity Solutions. It's auspiced by the Pigeon Beach Community Association, the PBCA. I'd like to advise that a local resident and president of the PBCA, Barry Cottrell, provided a $200 donation to my election campaign, the 12th of February 2016. I'd like to also make it known that I'm not a member of the PBCA. I do have, there's some wording here that I'm not, I think the process would be that, wouldn't it go to a vote of colleagues to determine whether or not to remain in the room?
Yes, but you can say that you believe that it is a perceived conflict of interest and that you can deal with the matter
I can consider this item impartially
please, Kathy.
And leave it up to my colleagues as to whether I remain in the room or not.
Yep. I too wish to declare a perceived conflict of interest in the matter, very similar to Councillor Wilkie's. This is in relation again to the Ecosystem Management Biosecurity Solutions grant, which is auspiced by Pigeon Beach Community Association. I advise that local resident and president of PBCA, Barry Cottrell, provided a $200 donation to my election campaign in March 2016. I advise that I am not, nor have I ever been, a member of PBCA, and as far as I'm aware, neither PBCA nor Mr. Cottrell will benefit financially from the grant under consideration. I believe I can deal with the matter impartially, and I request to remain in the meeting room, but that of course is subject to my fellow councillors. However, councillors, as you will note, we now lack a quorum to make a determination on whether or not Councillor Wilkie or I should remain in the room. As a result of these declarations of interest, Council can proceed by adopting the requirements of the Local Government Act, Section 175E, Part 6, which prescribes that Council can thus delegate the decision to the Chief Executive Officer. In that regard, I'm moving a motion that is on the screen at the moment, and I'll read that out, that in relation to the report by the Environment Services Manager to the Planning and Environment Committee meeting dated 12th of November 2019 regarding the 1920 Round 2 Community Environment Grant projects, Council A note the following declarations, that following the declarations of interest, that Council does not have a quorum to decide this matter, and B, delegate the decision in relation to the 2019-20 Round 2 Community and Environment Project grants to the Chief Executive Officer in accordance with Section 175E, Part 6 of the Local Government Act 2009.
I will second that, because it'll get lonely if Frank and I, if you two leave.
Seconded, Councillor Glasgow. Does anyone wish to speak to this? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. That completes our dealings with that particular item, and we move on when Councillor Stockwell returns. Okay, so we move to item 2 from the Planning and Environment Committee, and that is delegations for Plumbing and Drainage Act 2018 and Plumbing and Drainage Regulation 2019. Item number 3 is the Noosa Biosecurity Plan, which is referred to the General Committee, so we'll deal with that a bit later. Item number 4 is the development approval for an MCU for Education Type 2 school being a car park at 115 EUMUNDI, Noosa Road, Noosaville. Item number 5 is the Planning and Environment Court appeal refusal of an application for an MCU for ancillary dwelling unit at 64 Gateway Drive, Noosaville. Item number 6 was referred to the General Committee, so we'll deal with that later. Item number 7 is the Environment and Sustainable Development Department update for the first quarter. The recommendation is all those that haven't been dealt with otherwise be adopted.
I'll move that.
Moved Councillor Glasgow, seconded Councillor Stockwell. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. We now move on to the Services and Organisation Committee recommendations. Item number 1 is Community Environment Grants Program funding. Item number 2 is the Community Environment Grants Program funding for project grants equipment. Councillor Wilkie.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to declare a real conflict of interest in this particular matter, as I'm the president of the Noosa Arts Theatre and they are a proposed recipient of one of these grants, so I choose to leave the room while this matter is decided.
Thank you, Councillor.
I'm going to have a question.
Yes.
The Noosa Lions Football Club is one of these, and I'm not quite sure whether it was an equipment grant or not.
Oh no, I think we've got you later on.
And the same, is that the same with?
No.
It might be infrastructure, is it?
There it's under.
Football club and Zista. Okay, thank you. I just didn't want to miss it.
Okay. No, it's not there.
Okay,
So
I beat this time.
yeah,
I'll move that.
I'll second it.
Okay, moved Councillor Stockwell, seconded Councillor Pardon. Anyone wish to speak to it? Put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. We invite Councillor Wilkie back, please. Ms. CO.
You can see why.
Gotta be quick.
You can see why Brett didn't want to come to this meeting.
Yes.
Too much getting up and down. Okay, item number 3 we're on to now is the Community Environment Grants Program funding for community project grants round 2 events. I'm sorry folks, I'm going to have to declare a perceived conflict of interest in relation to Noosa Chorale, who are recipients in these grants. I do this because my wife happens to be a singer with the chorale. She is not an executive member of the Noosa Chorale. I don't have any association personally myself with the Noosa Chorale, but I think it's best, given that the Noosa Chorale will be receiving a benefit from council, that I put it to the test and allow my fellow councillors to determine whether I remain in the room. We need to move. Someone please move that someone else take over as chair.
I'll move that the Deputy Mayor assume the chair for the purposes of this matter.
It's all yours now, so
Sorry.
I can't chair anymore. You've now got to get Councillor Wilkie, assist Councillor Wilkie in determining my perceived conflict.
Okay, councillors, I would like to move that we note the perceived conflict of we note this as a perceived conflict of interest, declaration by Councillor Wellington, and resolve that this represents a perceived conflict of interest in this matter, and that Councillor Wellington may remain in the meeting room to participate in the debate and vote on this matter. May we have a seconder, please?
Yeah, I'll second that, Mr. Chair.
I don't wish to speak to it. Do any other councillors wish to speak to this motion? Put the motion. Those in favour? Against? The motion is carried.
I was going to ask whether she was
the
the
chair reverts back to me. Okay, so we have this item that we have to deal with separately now, which is the project grants events.
I'm happy to move it.
Moved Councillor Stockwell, seconded Councillor Pardon. Anyone wish to speak to it? Put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Stockwell, do you care to vote? Thank you. That's passed unanimously. We move on to item 4, which is the Community Environment Grants Round 2 Infrastructure. Councillor Stockwell.
I wish to declare a real conflict of interest in this matter due to the fact that I am the Vice President of the Noosa Lions Football Club and also a pseudo-executive role in the Noosa Sea Scouts as a group leader, and therefore I elect to leave the room for debate and decision on the matter.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, we're dealing with the Community Environment Grants Infrastructure.
Yeah, I'll move
Councillor Pardon, seconded Councillor Wilkie. Anyone need to speak to this?
No.
Put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We move on to item 5, which is the grants program funding round 2 for programs. Item 6 is the community grants program funding specifically for a 3-year alliance agreement with the Noosa District Community FM Radio Association. Item number 7 is the Regional Arts Development Fund grant recommendations.
Mr Chairman, item 7 please. I'd like to declare a real conflict of interest in this matter, being the president of the Noosa Arts Theatre, and they are a proposed recipient of one of these grants, so I'd choose to leave the meeting room please.
Thank you.
I'll move that.
I'll just wait until Councillor Wilkins left, thanks. Okay, as you were. Moved Councillor
Second.
Glasgow, seconded Councillor Pardon. Anyone wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous.
You could have waited for her to sit down again. That's what's fun about it.
Doing this on purpose. It's all good.
Item 8 was referred to the General Committee, which we dealt with later. Item 9 was referred to the General Committee. Item 10 referred to the General Committee. Item 11 referred to the General Committee. Item 12 is the Noosa North Shore Campground Fees and Charges and Interim Management Agreement. Item 13 is the Corporate Services Department update for the first quarter. Whoops.
Right.
Sorry, what was that?
12.
Brian's got a conflict.
I have on this bit.
Does he?
Is that not
News to me.
No, I don't think we've got any.
Wasn't there something on the campus?
Oh, that's right, yes.
Ah,
Yes,
all right,
yes,
we'll go
that's-
back to item 12.
Yes.
That's it.
I remember now.
Lucky Kathy's on the board.
I hadn't thought about the CEO. Yes, I'll declare a perceived conflict of interest in this matter. Due to my role as a group leader of Noosa Sea Scouts, where I'm involved in the setting the fees and charges for another not-for-profit campground in the Shire. I believe I can deal with the matter impartially. No.
What you did at the last one.
Is it? Okay. Yeah, I thought I got it. I believe I can deal with the matter impartially and in the public interest, and request to remain in the meeting room to participate in the debate and vote on this matter.
Thank you. Okay, councillors, any questions of Councillor Stockwell? Anyone care to move a motion with regard to his participation here?
Yeah, I'll move that.
Moved Councillor Pardon,
I'll second.
seconded Councillor Glasgow. The motion is that the perceived conflict of interest of Councillor Stockwell is noted and represents a perceived conflict of interest, and he may remain in the meeting and participate in the debate and vote. I'll put that. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Of course, Councillor Stockwell did not vote. We now carry on with that item, however, which is the Noosa North Shore Campground Fees and Charges.
I'll move
Moved Councillor Pardon. Sorry, Kathy, we're going too fast for you.
I'll second it, Mr Chairman.
Seconded Councillor Wilkie. Anyone wish to speak to this? Put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Item 13 is the Corporate Services Department update for the first quarter. Item 14 is the Community Services Department update for the first quarter. Item 15 is the Capital Program Delivery Status. Item 16 is Infrastructure Services Department update for the first quarter. Item 17 is the Executive Services Department update for the first quarter. Item 18 is the Local Government Legislative Reform Stage 2 report. Item 19 is the Operational Plan Progress Report for the first quarter. The recommendation is all those other than dealt with separately get adopted. Moved Councillor Glasgow, seconded Councillor Pardon. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. We'll now go on to the General Committee recommendations. Item number 1 is the Noosa Biosecurity Plan, but that is subject to a further report, so we'll deal with it as item 7. Item number 2 is the Planning and Environment Court appeal with regard to refusal of an application for operational works prescribed tidal works, extension to a jetty at 180 Gympie Terrace, Noosaville. Item number 3 is the draft Noosa District Sports Complex and Koroy Sports Complex Master Plans. Item number 4 is the Noosa Heads Lions Park Go Noosa Parking Report. Item number 5, construction of Hilton Terrace, Nurna Street to Wanton intersection corridor upgrade. I'm looking at you, Councillor Stockwell.
Yes. This is the one I was getting confused with last time. So I'd like to declare a perceived conflict of interest in this matter. being a world record number of announcements in one meeting. As I own a property at the Noosa Lakes Resort and I'm chairman of the Noosa Lakes Body Corporate, and the intersection roadworks extend across the frontage of the Noosa Lakes Resort site. So I believe, while I don't receive a direct benefit, I know that it may raise perceptions of a conflict of interest, and I elect to leave the room for the purpose of decision and debate.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so we're dealing with this item separately. Can I have a
Yeah, I'll
move and
move
seconded?
item
Move
five.
Councillor
Seconded.
Pardon, seconded Councillor Wilkie. Anyone need to speak to this? I'll put the
Yes,
motion.
let's get this thing done.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour, that's carried unanimously. We go back to the General Committee recommendations. Item number 6 is the Noosa Council Annual Report. Item number 7 is a further report on the Noosa Biosecurity Plan 2020. Item number 8 is the Go Noosa Route 065 Shuttle Bus Loop Service. Item 9 is the Budget Review 2 for the financial year. Item number 10 is the Financial Performance Report for October.
Move, Mr. Chair.
Recommendation is they be adopted. Move Councillor Pardon, seconded Councillor Glasgow. I'll put the motion. All those in favour. Thank you, that's carried. There are no reports direct to the ordinary meeting. There is, as usual, no confidential session. So for the first time, historically, we move on to public question time. And the first questions come from Brian O'Connor. Brian, if you wouldn't mind standing at the lectern there, we'll deal with them one at a time. If you would please read out your first question.
Yes, please. Thank you. Noosa Council has announced that it will cease operation of the mobile library in 2020, now just 2 months away, and has sought public feedback on the nature of alternative arrangements for having library items loaned out to hinterland residents. What was the feedback received? What is the alternative favoured by Noosa Council based on that feedback? Will further consultation occur? And if so, how and when? When does the Council plan to have the new arrangements in place? And will these be monitored to assess the success or otherwise of those new arrangements? I hope that's regarded as one question.
That is, yeah. You might as well stay there because you have another question coming up, but I'll ask Kerry Contini, Director of Community Services, to respond to that question, please.
Thank you, through the Chair. Thank you, Mr O'Connor, for your question. Noosa Council's mobile library is now 13 years old and reaching the end of its useful life, evidenced by the time that it's spending off the road rather than on the road. So Council staff have been in planning for over the last 12 months about potential options to replace the mobile library, and this has included extensive consultation with the mobile library customers and with community organisations and businesses in the area. Through that, they've looked at the needs of the community now and going forward and are looking at different options that will better service the community. This includes a smaller vehicle, such as a lightweight truck or a medium rigid truck, 24/7 vending machines and bulk loans to community organisations and facilities. It's likely that the final model will be a combination of these and that it will be implemented in mid-2020. Communities continuing to be kept informed and engaged in the consultation as we make the choices moving forward to suit community needs now and into the future. The community is being kept up to date through directly through to the customers, through the library's website, through the media and social media. Thank you.
So let's watch this space, Brian.
Okay.
Question 2.
Question 2 is, with the sale of the former Tewantin TAFE College complete, can Noosa Council provide an update on the final sale price, the estimated amount of money required to refurbish the building to an acceptable standard, likely uses including involvement by the private sector, estimated rental income from tenants, and the maintenance and utilities outlays in any 1 year? When will the building be occupied?
I'll answer this question, thanks. Unfortunately, we haven't secured the TAFE site yet. Indeed, it was determined that it was discovered after we made the offer, which is public knowledge, of 1.7 million for the site, which is less than the estimate of the value of the property, that there were constraints on the site, and those constraints can only be dealt with by the state government. So we are now waiting on the state government to resolve the issue of the constraints on the site, so that the site may be able to be purchased. I can actually update that only in the last 48 hours, those negotiations have resulted in a breakthrough that we will hopefully be able to make public very soon, which will help facilitate the purchase. But for the moment, the constraints on the site mean that the site cannot be purchased by council.
Can I ask a supplementary question?
You can try.
What are the nature of the constraints?
I'm unable to outline the nature of the constraints at this point in time because that has not been made public by the state.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Amelia Lawrenson. You've seen the drill. That was the dress rehearsal.
Thank you for this opportunity. This is a great initiative. Thanks. My first question is to the Mayor. Mr. Mayor, in keeping with your effort to increase transparency and openness in council, will the Noosa residents have the right to know the breakdown of the submissions made in relation to the Noosa plan and the new short-term stay laws in Noosa? That is, the total number of submissions made, the number of submissions that were invalid, spoiled, improper, the number of submissions that objected the new Noosa plan and local laws, and the number of submissions that approved the Noosa plan and local laws.
Thank you. I'm actually going to defer this question to Kim Rawlings, the Director of Environment and Sustainable Development, because she's actually in charge of the process. Okay. So if that's all right with you, I'll get Kim to answer.
Okay.
Hi, Amelia, through the chair. Yes, absolutely. So there'll be a public report that'll come to council, and that will document exactly how many submissions we received, a summary of the issues of those submissions, whether those submissions were in support or objection, whether those submissions resulted in the change proposed to the Noosa plan or not. And equally the same with the local law. So similar process, the public report will come forward outlining number of submissions received, the range of issues that are of concern for people, whether there's an indication of support or objection to the local law, and how they influenced or resulted in change to the local law. So absolutely that information will be made public.
Can I also add an extra question? Just want to ask Kim, what constitutes an invalid submission?
There is a requirement under the Planning Act that says what makes a properly made submission, and there's a set of criteria. You need to identify who's making the submission, outline what your issues are, and what the concern is that you're raising, and identify clearly what the nature of the provision you might be talking to. That's the sort of legal requirement about what makes properly made submission. I can tell you that every submission we've received, in every form, we're taking into account.
Fantastic. That's great news.
Can you move on to your second question, please,
Sure.
Amelia?
Second question, just in reference to consultation process. If we are still in a consultation process, my question is why some residents being told to rip out kitchens and being issued fees for short-term rentals? Is that a question also for
Yes.
Kim?
Again, it's Kim's department.
Yeah. Thanks, Amelia. Where there might be a requirement to either remove a kitchen or seek an approval for a second kitchen as part of a secondary dwelling, that's been done under the current planning requirements. That requirement's not proposed to change under the new planning requirements. So a dwelling house can only have one kitchen unless it's otherwise approved, or if a secondary dwelling is approved, it can have a kitchen. So if there is a requirement for someone to remove a kitchen or seek approval. That's been done under the current arrangements, and those arrangements aren't being proposed to be changed.
You might care to explain too that this is to do with state planning instruments as well as local government planning instruments.
Yeah, sure.
Please.
So those requirements stem from the state requirements. The Planning Act sets up a range of definitions about what is a secondary dwelling, what is a dwelling house, what is a dual occupancy, and councils are required to pick up those definitions. So these sorts of issues are guided by the Planning Act, the State Planning Act, and then reflected in council's planning scheme. With regards to fees, you ask about, any fees that are proposed as part of the new local law are not in at the moment. The draft local law is still in consideration. We've got lots of submissions to go through, so there aren't any fees people aren't being charged any fees regarding to short stay letting. However, some holiday properties and short-term properties may be paying the tourism levy. Council's had a tourism levy in since 2001 in some form or another, and properties that do holiday let or short-term let do pay the tourism levy.
Okay, thank you very much, Amelia.
Thank you.
Kate Gardner, please. Thanks, Kate.
Chair, has Noosa Council investigated the option to include subsidised river transport as part of the broader solution to traffic congestion in the Hastings Street precinct? And if so, what are the pros and cons of this proposal?
Thank you. I'll get Carl Billingham, who's Director of Infrastructure Services. He's in charge of our transport strategy, to answer.
Through the Chair, thanks for your question, Kate. First of all, I'd just like to explain a little bit about what's happened with the transport strategy. We had a large volume of suggestions for what could be investigated through that strategy, and it was decided that Council would focus on 5 of those priorities going forward. The first one was to investigate the park and ride facilities. This is being trialled this Christmas. The second one was to investigate parking management controls in congested areas. This is still under investigation, although some parking periods have been adjusted already. Trial a Noosa style shuttle bus. The Go Noosa loop service is being trialled this Christmas. Implement walk and ride to school programs. This is underway in 3 schools and we're hoping that more will volunteer shortly. Investigate the feasibility of priority transport lanes, and this is also being trialled this Christmas. So based on this, Council is not investigating subsidised river transport at the moment. However, a desktop review of the option of using subsidised river transport to Hastings Street precinct has highlighted the following issues. The existing tourist ferry service is a private operation and provides a relaxing trip along the river geared more towards tourists than operating as a dedicated public transport system. However, Council cannot introduce an alternative commercial venture or a service that will remove trade from existing private businesses. Council would be remiss if it established a ratepayer funded commercial activity that caused an existing commercial business to be financially impacted. Secondly, the wharves and jetties at either end of this route, here at Tewantin Marina and also at the Sofitel in Hastings Street, are private facilities. So they're not public facilities. They are therefore not accessible to the public, or at least not without some likely financial arrangement with those owners. There is also already a parking issue at Tewantin in the public area out the back here during peak times. If more people were to commute by boat to Hastings Street, the parking capacity at Tewantin will be further impacted. The existing ferry service and jetties do not comply with the Disability Discrimination Act, DDA, unlike the existing public buses and bus stops. And to upgrade the ferry service and jetty infrastructure would be very expensive. Lastly, in terms of capacity, the existing free Go Noosa holiday bus services operate at much greater frequency and therefore are able to move a greater number of people in less time and at less cost.
Thank you, Kate.
So can I comment in response?
Well, no, it's not within the standing orders, unfortunately, no.
Well, I mean, I think that Carl is saying there has been no proper investigation, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
So how does one get an investigation of an issue like that, given that it's been raised several times with council?
It has been raised in a number of forums, including, and we have a Transport Strategy Steering Group, which has stakeholder representation from Hastings Street Association, from Zen Inc, etc., on that. And it has also been raised in other forums, and we've even had a document that was worked up by some university students presented to us, and all of those have actually been considered. But again, the problem comes down to two major issues. One is that the ferry wharves at either end are not public. They are privately owned, and that there is an issue with parking, because if we try and channel more people onto ferry services, they're going to want to drive to where they get the ferry, and that becomes an issue.
I said to you in an email, Mr Mayor, the assumption that everyone will drive to those points to collect the ferry is totally incorrect. I mean, I walk to the marina regularly. I can ride my bike to the marina. There's lots of parking at 7 different points to board and leave the ferry. And then as to the parking that council currently uses, presumably that's not private parking.
You mean, well, lots of our staff in fact park in the public car park. But we're setting a very dangerous precedent here, I'm afraid, and that is there is in fact in the standing orders no opportunity for debate on these issues. I'm more than happy at the end of the meeting to talk to you further about it, and I'm sure Carl is also.
So will the minutes record that there hasn't been an investigation?
The minutes record the statement that Carl Billingham has made, yes.
And that there hasn't been an investigation?
Well, that was Carl Billingham.
Point of order.
Yes, sure.
I'm really concerned that as the first time we're doing this question time, we're going way outside standing orders. I request
You're quite right.
that the question be quiet and allow us to proceed with the meeting as.
The statement, as you heard, has been recorded, and that's the end of the matter, I'm afraid. Thank you. We move on. There is no further business for this evening, so the next ordinary meeting is the 19th of December 2019 here in Council Chambers. I call the meeting to a close.